Welcome to the Strange Rainbows podcast, episode 4, Rainbows. Hiya, how's it going? How's the weather with you? Hopefully you have sunshine and a fresh breeze at your back, or at least you're still pushing on through the rain. Let's start with a poem today. I wrote it on Friday the 13th when I was in an overcast mood, and I think writing it helped me find the rainbows in the dark. In today's whimsical story, we return to the Society of Friendly Intentions sooner than I was expecting, with a wager on whether a skeptical parascientificalist can find the mythical third rainbow. And to finish off, I collected a dozen surprising science facts about rainbows in a little science report. They really are rather improbable and fascinating. Maybe that's why I see them wherever I go. I see rainbows. I see rainbows of colour wherever I go, in the rain and the fog, in the mist and the snow. I might see them by day and by night in my dreams, and in much stranger places where naught's what it seems. When I'm walking in town I see rainbows around. They float up in the sky and they brighten the ground. I enjoy their bright shades and their colourful hue, and whenever I see one it brightens my mood. But it's not only rainbows that I tend to see, because there's plenty out there that's of interest to me. And I thought that I'd share with you my rainbow strange that pops into my mind and I just wouldn't change. I see murals, graffiti, from tags to street art, from the simple to beauty that pulls at my heart. It's a gallery sometimes, like in Montreal, where the artworks are marvels that cover the wall. And it's green in the grey that I notice as well, the wild flowers that grow like a magical spell. And some grasses and trees that spring up in the cracks or from out of the walls of the tumble-down shacks. Now and then I look up and see birds in the sky as they tumble and wheel, diving down from on high, or just perched on the buildings or looking for food. It's the pigeons are evil, the ravens are good. There's a rainbow of textures on wood and on stone, little scratches and flaws that show entropy's home. Where we all have our scratches, it's just who we are. Better love what we have, not just wish from afar. Recently I have noticed small metallic things that have fallen to earth like a screw, key or spring. Little parts that have fallen out of the machine. Should I start to collect them? There's stories to glean. I see people as well, because they're already there, in the streets and the alleyways, thronging the square. But their noisy intentions can push me away, so I yearn for the quiet of night over day. And I forgot to mention, I also see cats. I can't walk past a feline wherever they're sat. I will gently approach, offering a calm hand. If they choose to ignore me, I back off and stand. There's a rainbow that glows through a prism of glass. Let it shine on my hand. Try to hold the thing fast. But no matter how hard I hold my hand closed tight, when I open, the rainbows fled off in the night. I see hearts, leaves and ghost doors and colours of blue. If I focus on other things, I see them too. I can choose what I notice, but if I don't care, I just see the same things that I see everywhere. Well, there's plenty more things that I don't recall now that'll grab my attention, books, music or chow. What I love is that there are so many diverse, and without all our differences life would be worse. Now I wonder what things out there you tend to spot. Keep an eye out and notice what you see a lot. Is it faces or people, dogs, coffee or shoes, or some darkness or lightness that interests you? Do you stand in the rainbow and look to the dark, or enjoy where the artists have left their strange mark? Let's see rainbows and darkness and hope and despair, 'cause this life could need more rainbows everywhere. That's the rainbow of things I keep seeing. What does your rainbow look like? Have you ever seen a double rainbow? I haven't, at least not yet. There are legends that tell of a mythical triple rainbow, not just reflections, but 3 distinct rainbows. Here is a story about one skeptical parascientificalist's search to find one. Triple rainbow. I sat outside my thesis advisor's office, waiting for him to bring me in and tell me my time at the Society of Friendly Intentions was over. My thesis was failing, as I had struggled to define the parameters for my research topic, devolving into procrastination by researching a multitude of other, suddenly far more interesting topics instead. His door opened, and he beckoned me in without a word, closing it behind me with a thud that sounded like the last nail of judgment being driven into my coffin of failure. I sat and listened as he started to speak. "Once upon a rainbow," he said, "there was a persnickety young parascientificalist by the name of Dr. Adelrod Trundlepith Fairfathom. He lived in the town of Eldwittish on the banks of the Three Rivers. He was of course a fellow of the Society, as befit his lineage. As you are no doubt aware, the Eldwittishes were one of the three families that had founded the town of Eldwittich, along with the Strangeleys and the Fairfathoms. Each member of the families had a particular strangeness that found them by their age of majority. Should it not, they might be encouraged to leave the town, as had happened with the recent scandalous allegations of unstrangeness regarding one Tatterlily Strangely. Those occurrences are a matter of record within the yearlies of the Society, and I shall not go into them further here. I looked at my adviser with dread. Surely he was about to dismiss me from the Society and dash my hopes of ever becoming a fellow. Was this story his way of twisting the knife, of mocking me for my failure? He continued. Dr. Adelrod had a particular fascination with the science of rainbows, and this was his chosen area of study in the College of Parascientificalities. He had, by the time the events I shall recount in this tale occurred, published a round dozen papers on the subject, which can be found in the library for those who choose to look. They include such works as The Precise Geometrical Measurement of the Rainbowical Angularity, a study on the boundary conditions twixt the rainbowical colorations of red and orange, and perhaps his most precise work to date, Differentiation of the Refractory Indices of the Double Rainbow in Late-Stage Thunderstorms. All fascinating papers, no doubt, written with a specific and mathematical precision that some might say bordered on the pedantic. For that was a comment frequently whispered about Adelrod, that he was pedantic to the point of argumentativity, and would pursue his point with increasing specificity until his conversation partners lost interest and let him win the conversation, as it were. At debates he was always on solid ground, for he would only ever discuss his own area of knowledge. It was fair to say he was an expert on the subject of the geometricals of rainbows, and also fair to say he did not hold back in letting others know it. It was surmised that this pedantry was perhaps due to the mathematical specificity of his chosen research area, although it extended also to the precise temperature his coffees should be served at, the angle of the knives and forks at the dining table, and of course the posture, diction, and general behaviour of his fellows of the Society of Friendly Intentions. All this tended to mean that he was rather a good fit to the Society, and yet he was roundly disliked by many. Perhaps this was the reason he had been passed over for promotion several times. He did not play well with others unless they acceded to his arguments, and while this might be a laudable trait in a professor, it was not one in an aspiring doctor, since the status for it was simply lacking, an irony of fate that grounded his ship in the rocky waters of ambition, as it were. And so it came one day to the wager. No doubt you have heard of this. It was in an otherwise unremarkable assembly under the light of the dark moon, shortly after that regrettable business with the Strangely girl. The Society was still in something of an uproar, pent-up energies awaiting some focus for release. So when the good Doctor stood to present his latest paper, Rainbowic Geometricals, Why They Cannot Be Comprehended by Mediocre Minds, a certain murmuring began amongst the assembled listeners at the Society. That murmuring rose to a grumbling, and from there to a heckling. Before the Doctor could present the central thesis of his paper, the room was loud and, dare I say it, disruptive. If the assembled fellows could behave more like adults and less like mediocre normals, I should be much obliged, cried out Dr. Adelrod. Be quiet, I say. Let the knowledge I have to impart enlighten your minds. Well, that was the flame on the fire, as they say, and the room devolved into shouting. One voice rose above the others, and it was that of Dr. Eldridge E. Eldwittish, whose offer of collaboration on a research paper Adelrod had recently rebuffed, and who still had something of a metaphorical knife to grind. You be quiet, boomed Dr. Eldridge. Why, do you even know the meaning of rainbows? What? Do I know? You dare challenge my knowledge? Retorted Adelrott. I find nothing in the learned fellow's papers regarding the true nature of the triple rainbow to be seen from the heights of Mount Kregenborg, insinuated Edelridge slyly. A myth, no more. Children's tales, blustered Adelrott. Ah, so the learned fellow accepts his lack of expertise in this matter. Why, I certainly not. I shall pursue my next paper on the very subject, as was already my intention, lest it be suspected otherwise, and I shall return with a full documentation of the geometricals of the triple rainbow, stated Adelrott, his hubris leading him fully into Edelridge's trap. A wager it is, stated Edelridge, pulling a guinea out of her pocket and slapping it down on the table, for that was the traditional amount of any wager amongst fellows of the society. And despite Adelrott's mounting horror, it was so documented, and his expedition began its preparations the very next day, for backing out of a public wager would surely signal the end of his ambitions. Supplies were gathered, a reliable, if somewhat dull guide by the name of Bodge hired, and an expedition put together within the brief span of a few days. Each day, Dr. Edelridge would happen to pass by, and happen to ask Dr. Adelrott if he should like to back out of the wager. This did nothing more than stoke the fires of Adelrott's resolve and speed the preparations, and the expedition set out within the week. At the very least we'll have a few months free of his pedantry. It would be worth losing the wager just for that, Edelridge was heard to say to her fellows in the common room that evening, to much laughter and backslapping all round. It was a journey of several weeks to reach the foothills of Mount Kregenborg, and it passed uneventfully, save for some rather tedious lectures by Adelrott on the optimal travel speed for the wagons based on the angular momentum of the gradual slope they were traversing. Bodge was a rather prosaic but competent normal, and just nodded, ignoring Adelrott's fancy nonsense. The horses pulled the wagon climbed the slope. That was enough for him. And so they rode into the foothills until the path became too steep for the wagon, and the small company continued on foot, leaving the wagon with a single guard to await their return. Adelrott made meteorological measurements each morning, afternoon, and evening, and they continued to climb. After several days, it became steep enough that they needed to start using some of the climbing equipment they'd brought. Adelrott cursed the audacity of Edelridge for luring him into such a wager, and convinced himself that he would indeed take parascientifical measurements of the mythical triple rainbow, and present them at a meeting of the society to grand applause from the collected fellows. Edelridge would smile at him, and that thought filled him with a strange warmth in the cooling air. They continued to climb, and the circumstances of their ascent are not the subject of our tale today. Suffice to say that Adelrott became rather less rotund in the subsequent weeks of climbing, and found a strength within himself that he had not before had occasion to exercise. The event I should like to recount occurred when, after much travail, they approached the lower summit of Mount Kregenborg. This was not the highest summit, of course, for an ascent to those heights was feasible only for the most experienced and tenacious climbers, and even then only to be attempted in the most fortuitous of circumstances. No, this was the second summit, and they were a scant day's climb from it. According to his measurements, that would be the ideal spot from which to take measurements and make the momentous discovery of the legendary triple rainbow. Adelrott fell asleep with a tipple of port wine, for at least some essentials had to be brought even on a climb such as this, dreaming of his magnificent discovery, and of presenting his findings to the antagonistic Edelridge, with the other fellows fading into the background. He was rudely shaken awake by Bodge, and his protestations silenced with a shush. It was still night, and screeching and hissing could be heard approaching the camp from all sides. Bodge had a sword in one hand, a lantern in the other. The others of the company were also armed and on high alert. The strange, high-pitched noises got ever closer as many somethings scrabbled towards the camp. Adelrott felt a great terror seize him. Was he to die here, on a high mountain top? But a day's climb from the summit, and his inevitable parascientifical discovery. Malformed shapes of all different sizes stopped just outside the edge of the light. They ranged from the size of a cat to the size of a large orangutan, perhaps with something larger still lurking out there in the darkness. One stepped forwards into the light, shading its eyes. It was a grey creature, something like a lopsided gibelin, pitifully thin and beseeching with hands and eyes. Was it hungry? Cold? Did these creatures live up here? The guards held tighter to their swords, terror in their eyes at these unnatural, monstrous forms now surrounding the camp. Bodge looked towards Adalrot, ready to defend the camp on command. Another of the creatures shambled forwards into the light. This one was larger and shaped like a twisted and gnarled old tree made of grey stone. Bodge and his company tensed, for this one seemed like an even greater threat. It stared at Adalrot with mournful eyes. Another stepped forward, this one tumbling like a rolled boulder, with smaller pebbles tumbling beside it. All were grey and thin and looked worn beyond measure. Clearly these poor grey creatures were starving and fading away on this high peak without sufficient nourishment. But he would need the remainder of his supplies to complete his trip to the summit, and there discover and document the mythical triple rainbow and gain the acclaim of his peers. His provisions were precisely calculated, with but a contingency of 7.3% for emergency. They were travelling as light as possible, as the climb was hard. His triumphant discovery would certainly lead to a professorship, and then almost acknowledge his superior parascientifical knowledge. He need but signal to Bodge, who would take care of the necessary business, and then he could complete his trip and win the wager. He looked towards Bodge. Just the merest nod would trigger the onslaught and his inevitable success. It was but the work of a moment to decide, hardly a decision at all. And yet, he looked at the sorry bunch of thin, pale grey figures around him, their misshapen bodies covered with fur and lichen like mangy dogs. They were pathetic. They beseeched him with their sorry eyes. In just a moment they would be gone and trouble him no more. And yet, he stared into those eyes and imagined what they might be if properly nourished and cared for. Perhaps if fed they might return to vibrant life. The child he had once been laughed within him at the thought, and a smile crossed his grumpy, dour face. It was hardly a decision at all. He turned to Bodge to give the fateful command. "Weapons down, if you please, Bodge." Adalrot hurried to his pack and broke out his provisions, a last wheel of cheese, several loaves of bread, the small bottle of port wine that he'd been saving to toast his success. He bade Bodge to build up a warm campfire and beckoned the creatures into the light. Almost stumbling in his haste, he handed out food and drink, serving the creatures, sharing what he had to offer. There were as many as a dozen, and they ate hungrily and drank deeply. Soon enough their provisions were all gone, and they had nothing left for the morrow. It would be a hard descent, but that wasn't what mattered now. And as he watched the creatures eat, Adalrot imagined he saw a patch of amber orange on one. Surely a trick of the light, a reflection of the campfire. No, another one started to show a pinkness to its fur, and the gnarled, twisted one bloomed small flowers from its now rich brown limbs. Each of the creatures showed a different colour, and became robust and full of health, and they danced in the light of the campfire. One reached for Adalrot's hand, and with great hesitation, then growing enjoyment, and finally, with transformative abandon, he danced with them. Bodge pulled out a small drum from somewhere, and began to beat a rhythm, and one of his company found a penny whistle, and began to play a merry tune, and others sang along. And through the night Adalrot danced with the strange, colourful creatures, and thought nothing of geometricalities or of the society at all. Well, not of most of them. As dawn lightened the sky, the creatures ceased their dance and lolloped away from the campfire. The first one who had entered the circle of light was the last to leave, and before it did, it put a hand on its chest and spoke. Just the word Cricklecritch. Adalrot put his hand solemnly on his chest and began, Doctor... No. He took a deep breath and said simply, Adalrot. And the scarlet-furred creature turned and was soon out of sight, and Adalrot looked at the tired company around him, and smiled at Bodge, and shook his hand, and those of all the company warmly, thanking them, thanking the rainbow of creatures, thanking the mountain, and the whole realm. It was a hard trip down. If they had not found the small mountain stream, they might have died of thirst, and if they hadn't found the surprising patch of mountain berries, they might have starved. Even so, one of the company was nearly lost to exhaustion. Adelrod himself carried him down the last mile, and when the company finally reached the foothills and the wagon with its load of supplies came into sight, they laughed with relief. And once the company was taken care of and the exhausted one was on the mend, Adelrod danced a little jig. And so, several weeks later, it was a different Adelrod that returned to the Society of Friendly Intentions. He was called to present his results at the next assembly, and the fellows of the society, expecting a long and tedious lecture on the geometricalities of the triple rainbow, had brought books to read, or pillows to aid their comfortable sleep through it. "Well, Adelrod, you seem somehow different today. Have you brought us the parascientificalities of the legendary triple rainbow to remove one more piece of magic and wonder from the world?" asked Edelridge. And for the first time, Adelrod realized her eyes were hazel with small flecks of gold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a guinea. "Indeed, I have not. The wager is yours," he said, and handed over the coin. Her hand was warm where he placed it, and he left the chamber to jeers from the fellows echoing in his ears, and with the sight of Edelridge's surprised hazel golden eyes in his mind. And the next day, he applied to Edelridge for a collaboration on the essence of rainbows, and his application was accepted, and the two commenced to collaborate on the research paper. They collected measurements and magical impressions by day, and worked long into the night. And what happened in one of those long night sessions of work and close collaboration has not been protocoled in the yearlies of the Society, and I shall certainly not recount it to you now. Suffice it to say that their collaboration was close, and rather productive. I stared at my advisor, struck dumb by this story I really had not been expecting. I thought he'd called me in here to dismiss me from my studies. He seemed to be waiting for me to speak, and I didn't know what to say. "But what happened to Adelrod? And Elrich Elwitish? Why are you telling me this? I thought—" "Indeed, you thought. Thinking does seem to be a strength of yours. The very specific and methodical thinking that might find a place in, shall we say, a college of parascientificality." "But I'm an Eldwitich," I said. "The families can't just switch and change between colleges." "Even though they want to," I finished, surprising myself at the truth I'd just spoken. I hadn't realized it before, but yes, I was struggling with the vague airy-fairy nebulousness of magic, and yearned for the detailed approach of parascientificality. Adelrod found his right place, student, as you must surely follow yours. With that, he handed me an already signed approval of transfer from the study of vague magics that I'd been so struggling with to the College of Parascientificalities. That piece of paper changed my direction, and I found a home in the parasciences that led me to many fascinating discoveries. I would not have made them at all if I'd not been able to transfer over. My advisor smiled at me, wished me luck, and led me out of the room. As I went, I glanced for a moment at the name sign on his desk. A. Trundlepith Eldwitich, College of Magic. It wasn't unheard of for a man to take on his wife's name upon marriage. Could it be? "Off you go then. Enjoy your specificals," he smiled, and I could but reply, "Thank you, Professor." What is rainbow? I thought about presenting this sciencey bit as one of Adelrod's papers given to the Society, but the way rainbows work is very specific to the physics and natural conditions of our Earth and the way human perception works in the eye and brain. It wouldn't work the same in the magical world of strangenesses and multiple moons, so I'm simply going to present for your entertainment a dozen true facts about how our rainbows work. Wiktionary.org defines rainbow as a multicolored arch in the sky, produced by prismatic refraction of light within droplets of rain in the air. I did a bit of research to try and understand it, and what I learned is that there's a lot of strangeness in rainbows: light, water, shadows, perception, and reality itself. To understand rainbows, we have to start with light. Fact number 1, the speed of light isn't constant. It may be constant in a perfect vacuum, at around 300,000 kilometers or 186,000 miles per second. But we don't live in a perfect vacuum. In air, it travels a fraction slower, but through water the speed is only 3/4 as fast. Through glass it's 2/3, and through diamond it's 2/5. Light travels slower through water than air. You can see that by putting a spoon in water, and it looks like it bends. 2. White light from the sun isn't white. It's actually made up of all colours of light in the visible spectrum. Now, light is a strange thing in itself, and I'm not going to get into photons, additive and subtractive light, or perceived light here. Just to say that white light contains all visible colours of light at their different wavelengths. Red has the longest wavelength, with infrared beneath it, and violet has the shortest, with ultraviolet above it. 3. Rainbows don't just form in rain. They can form in any liquid droplets that are acting like prisms, including fog, mist, and other chemicals than water, and they'd look different on other planets with a different atmosphere. So here's basically how it works with a classic rainbow in the sky. The sun is low in the sky behind you and shines towards countless water drops in the sky in front of you. If it hits the drops at a certain angle, the light refracts inside each raindrop because the wavelength of different colours of light is different. So the colours spread out, then these reflect off the back of the raindrop, still inside it, and come out the front and through the air to hit your eyes. Fact number 4. You see red when the angle between your eyes going up to the raindrop and then up to the sun is 42 degrees, which happens to be the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Violet is about 40 degrees. 5. You don't actually see the full spectrum from any one raindrop because the angles are different. So you're seeing red from some drops, orange from others, and so on. It's not that you're seeing a whole rainbow from each drop, it's that you're seeing a tiny fraction of the rainbow from each of many drops. 6. There is no rainbow, meaning it's not actually an object you can touch and approach. It's an optical illusion formed in the eye and brain. 7. We all see a different rainbow. Because it's formed by particular photons of light hitting our eyes, it's formed by different photons reflecting out of different raindrops at a different angle for someone else. So if you move towards it, you're seeing a different rainbow. And people perceive colours differently, so even if they were looking at a photo of a rainbow, they might see different colours. They look very different for folks with different kinds of colour blindness. Let's not even go into the fact that the eyes see upside down, and the brain inverts the image right now. 8. The rainbow isn't centered around your eyes, but actually around the shadow of your head on the ground. That's strange, but I am happy shadows found their way into it somehow. Oh yeah, and the area between two rainbows in a double rainbow is the darkest. 9. Rainbows look curved because the way you see them is as if there's a cone with a point at your eyes and the big circular bit out on the sky. Oh yeah, 9.5, rainbows aren't bows at all, they're circular, and you can see the whole thing from up in an airplane, or maybe on a high mountain. It's just because we're standing on the ground that the lower half gets cut off by the horizon. 10. A double rainbow can occur when the light reflects again inside the raindrops. The second rainbow in a double rainbow is upside down, so where the normal rainbow has red on the outside, the second has it on the inside. If you see a photo with two rainbows, both with red on the outside, it's been faked. There can be triple and quadruple rainbows caused by more reflections, and sometimes they're curved differently. 11. Fire rainbows are pastel rainbow patterns formed on clouds which are caused by sunlight hitting flat ice crystals in cirrus clouds. They aren't made of fire or rain, and they don't have a bow shape, but they do look like a tear in the sky where beautiful rainbowness is leaking through into our grey world. It's well worth doing an image search for fire rainbows. 12. Metaphorically, a rainbow represents many things because a symbol gains meaning when we add context. For me personally, it represents beautiful diversity. The different colours of light all move at different angles and bounce through different raindrops, and it takes all of them, or all of us, to make up the beautiful rainbow. 13. There's plenty more strange stuff like cloud bows, sun bows, red rainbows, supernumerary rainbows, and of course moonbows, which are created by the reflection of the sun's light off the moon. In fact, I suspect that there are also very faint rainbows in space, since it's not a perfect vacuum and the rainbows on different planets could look quite different to ours. Every facet here gets stranger the more I dig into it, so I'll give our tired brains a rest now and just say, aren't rainbows beautiful? So there's a few quick science facts about rainbows. It would have got a whole lot stranger if I'd tried to overlay the fantastical world of the Society of Friendly Intentions onto it. I'll be reading the wonderful fairy tale The Maker of Rainbows on Patreon this Saturday, and I hope to see you here next week for the start of my favourite season, which is of course autumn, aka fall. Thanks for listening. The Strange Rainbows podcast is copyright Mike Storm 2024, all rights reserved. It is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to actual names, characters, businesses, places, events, or persons, living, dead, or imaginary, is entirely coincidental.